Hello, my name is Brother Sean, and I would like to share with you a personal reflection on the theme of this very short video, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. A very powerful statement from Jesus when he was on the cross and he cried out to his Father, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And that was to the Roman soldiers, to the Jewish high priests, for allowing this to happen. But again, it had to happen because it was biblically prophesied by Isaiah. So how do we forgive someone who has done some terrible atrocities to their people? Take, for example, Hitler, Saddam Hussein, Mussolini, and some of the world's great tyrants. How do we forgive them? And take it more personally and bring it to home. Say you're the victim of a heinous crime. It is so difficult, isn't it, to forgive someone who's not only abused you, but taken your life from you. And that is a normal, healthy reaction. But if we say that we're followers of the light, followers of a loving God, then we both know that there is no argument here. It's not open for discussion. Because the words of Jesus, the barefoot Galilean, are very simple. Unless you forgive 70 times 7, you will never be forgiven yourself. Wow. Very powerful stuff. And you know, you've often heard people say, as I have, particularly back in Ireland, oh Jesus, I forgive them, but I'll never forget them for what they done to me. Let's reflect on that. I forgive them, but I'll never forget what they did to me. Is that forgiveness? What do you think? My heart is saying that is not forgiveness, because the essence of true forgiveness is both forgiving and forgetting and wiping the memory clean with divine love. But that can't be done on a human level, because we haven't got the capability of doing that alone. And that's where we call on the divine. That's where we invite, invoke, and ask the Spirit of a loving God to come and help us and empower us to take on the mindset of God. And what would God say to us? Well, God, for a start, would be angry at the person for what they've done in terms of violating your personhood. And I know for a fact that Jesus is weeping as I speak at man's inhumanity to man. And around the world, there's a catalogue of abuse, some carried out in the name of God by religious zealots in all churches, in all faiths. There's a catalogue of abuse with politicians, a catalogue of abuse in families, in villages, in communities. And I know that Jesus is not happy because man has stepped out of his comfort zone, his protection with God, and has embraced a mindset of ego and pure self-hate. Hatred towards oneself, which is manifested in how one treats others. There's like a contempt. And the example I would give you is the young boy who grows up and his mother gives him a real difficult time and starts abusing him verbally, physically, emotionally, psychologically, on all levels. And how do you think that young man is going to be when he's a grown man, an adult, married with his own children? Well, one, he's going to be fearful of women. He's going to have issues with the opposite sex. And it has been well documented in research that he ends up himself abusing women and punishing them for what his mum did to him. So we have to break that chain. I know in my own life, I had to really forgive my father for years of systematic abuse, violent abuse, because I took the violence and the sexual abuse to protect my brothers and sisters. But then when I entered the monastery, I was made aware 15 years later that he carried on abusing my sister. And that gutted me terribly. And I loved my dad, but my dad didn't know what love meant, because I know he was abused himself. But when he was very ill with Alzheimer's, I went to see him to anoint his feet. I was guided in prayer to go and anoint my father's feet and pray with him, though he was in another world of his own. But you know, the inner child in me started playing up. Don't go, don't go. Even my mind brought back memories of childhood, and I started getting incontinent with fear. So I asked Jesus to help me and send me help. And I went to see my father in Dublin, and I stood there outside the door and I sweated cobs. And I'm a grown man. But I went in with the courage of Jesus. It was divine help. It was not human help. I hadn't the resources to deal with this forgiving. I went in and I stood there and I looked at him and my heart just broke. And I could immediately see flashbacks when he would tear the skin off my back with the buckle on his belt and then abuse me. But as I looked at him, I tried to see Christ. I found that very hard. So I pleaded with God, help me. Help me see you in my dad. Help me love him as you love him. Help me forgive him as you have forgiven him. And my dear friend, Brother Rob, stood next to me and supported me. Thank God for Rob. And I anointed my father's feet, and I asked Jesus to love him and forgive him because I had loved him and that I'd now forgiven him. And you know, when I went up to place my hands on his head and my hand on his heart, I just said, Dad, I love you. I have always loved you, and I forgive you. In Jesus' name. Be at peace. And I came away from that scenario very weak, very vulnerable, and exhausted. And I needed to rest. But then I got a strong message in prayer to write to my brothers and sisters and ask them to forgive my dad, because he'd been very ill with this Alzheimer's for 8 years. But in the last 3 years of his life, my word, he really suffered. And in the biopsy, it turned out that he was riddled with cancer, hence the violence and the aggression and the confusion. But I was guided to write to them and ask them, please go and see Dad and forgive him, because he knows he's hurt us and he needs our forgiveness. And they didn't. They didn't want to know. And that really cut me up. So forgiveness goes with forgetting everything. And when Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, on many levels we never know what we do, because a lot of what we do is done in the heat of the moment. And it's not for me to say that Hitler was a bad man or Saddam Hussein, and I would never say they were evil men, because they're a child of God and they're loved by God as you and I are. But God will see to what they've done, and it's not up to you or me. So let's forgive and forget. Bless you.